Welcome to the On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast, your one-stop shop for obesity medicine news with your host, man on the pen, Dave Knapp. Welcome to On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast for this Tuesday, February 4th, 2025. I'm your host, Dave Knapp, man on the Manjaro. That's why I'm here. You are on the pen. Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Manjaro, Zepbound, Compound. That pen is what we talk about each and every week here at On the Pen, the Weekly Dose. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the thumbs up button. If you are listening on Apple Podcast or wherever you get your podcasts, make sure that you leave us a 5-star rating and review. It really helps the work that we do get out. I can't do this without you. I bring you the show. You do that part. It helps get this out and everybody wins. How's everyone doing today? Welcome to those who are joining live on YouTube. We announced last week that the podcast will now be recorded every Tuesday at noon Central Time, live on YouTube. And so if you want to follow along live, feel free to join us on Tuesdays at noon live. But this will also be uploaded to the various podcast platforms. We also announced a little bit of a formatting change to align with our goals for advocacy, along with educational information. We wanted to just align the podcast a little bit more clearly with what some of our objectives are for advocacy this year. In doing so, we have also changed the formatting just to be a little bit more intentional to make sure we're bringing you the best information as well. So we'll go a little bit over the news every week in the current drugs that are on the market. We'll talk about new drugs that are potentially coming to market in the future. Of course, we'll always talk about advocacy and policy and a little bit for the investors, because many people follow this to just get information about what are some of the new companies that are out there. What are they doing? And even with the current companies, how does the news impact potential changes for investors? Of course, this is not financial advice. It's not investor advice or medical advice. I am neither a financial analyst or a doctor, but I certainly do follow the topics of anti-obesity medication as close as just about anyone on the planet. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being the best part of what we do. Let's get into some unintended consequences this week as we talk about the current medications that are on the market. I think it's really important to keep our fingers on the pulse of what's going on. Of course, nothing has been bigger in the news when it comes to patients than the issue of accessibility. And of course, in the background of all this, we have the Obesity Association and their lawsuit against the FDA and Eli Lilly to improve accessibility to compounds ultimately, now that the FDA has officially ended the shortage of tirzepatide. Of course, that has major implications for the legality of compounding medications that are still under patent from the patent holders, Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk. And so one of the interesting things that's sort of been happening since Lilly really started to crack down after the shortages ended by their definition in October, you saw cease and desist letters flowing to even medical providers, astoundingly, but you saw them flow more so to different telehealth companies and med spas. At the same time, we actually saw some cease and desist letters go out to those in the gray market peptide world, right? That would be the for research purposes only. And you all are very clear on where I stand on research grade versions of these medications. It's an unregulated industry. These are labeled not for human consumption, which absolves these companies legally of any adverse events. It's like they are profiting the most without putting any skin in the game, really. And so people go to these gray markets. They take these unsupervised by their doctors. It's nothing that we would ever condone here at On the Pen. That said, a lot of the a lot of the environment that's created by the system that we have here in the United States have left many people on the margins looking towards these options. And so one of the things I wanted to cover today, I just thought it was interesting shift, is that you see sort of an unintended consequence of Lilly going after the gray market peptides, what they're doing here, because they're afraid of using trade names and the names that whatever names of these molecules that Lilly has mentioned in their cease and desist letters. As an unintended consequence, I want to share with you something. If you're watching along on YouTube, you'll be able to see exactly what I'm showing you here. But essentially what they've done at some of these research grade peptide companies is they've started to name these peptides instead of tirzepatide or semaglutide or retatrutide. They've started to just name them all GLP-1 with a single letter after them. And that is supposed to somehow help people designate what medication they're actually purchasing. But in the end, I think it'll just cause more confusion. And of course, all these peptides have different dosing schedules. I think this is going to lead to very, very bad things. And again, it's just one of those unintended consequences of what happens when there isn't affordable and equitable access to anti-obesity medication. So that is just another major glaring reason why it's so important for us to go after the system and demand change systemically in this country. The system has created a whole host of issues for patients. Who suffers the most in this system? It's not the PBMs, it's not the pharmaceutical companies, it's the patients. The patients suffer. And so that's what we will continue to advocate for. This is sort of one of those unintended consequences, I think. Lilly goes after them to try to shut them down. So what do? They juke, they just rename things. So now it's just more confusing to the people that do go there. Again, not anything that we condone, but we have to live in the reality here. We live in the reality where there are many within the OTP community who use these. Nothing that I have ever condoned, nothing that I can nothing that I can vouch for, right? But I do know that people use them. And so because they use them, we talk about them. And this will create all sorts of chaos. And I'm just so afraid of what harm may be done to people because of this type of stuff that's going on. So we'll move on to the topic of some new drugs in development. And this is one where if you've been following On the Pen for a long time, we take great pride in bringing you just information before anybody's talking about it, right? And so one of the things that we were talking about 2 years ago was a little molecule called Retatrutide. Retatrutide. We literally, I think if you could probably filter Retatrutide videos on YouTube, ours were the first probably several videos that were made on the topic of Retatrutide. It's one that's caught our attention for a long time. It will be an absolute game changer. It'll be a game changer among game changers for medication. You think anti-obesity medication, you think about the way that people have responded to the current treatments, semaglutide, tirzepatide. And so for many, many people living with the disease of obesity, these have been absolutely game-changing medicines, but there are a whole lot of people on the peripheral who still, like myself, could use the next generation of these medications. So Retatrutide will be a game changer among game changers. And we spotted a new interesting company called, and actually this is more on the investor side, so I kind of jumped ahead, but just talking about new companies to take a look at. This company is very, very, very intriguing. It's a company, you can find them on the stock ticker. It's going to be SEPT or SEPN, excuse me, SEPN. It's a company called Septerna, and Septerna is got some clinical stage drugs in development that are very exciting. They are looking more from the aspect of developing oral small molecule drugs. And so in looking at sort of some of the things that they're doing, they're leveraging a platform to develop these drugs, which is a proprietary platform to them. It's very interesting. I'm sure there's AI involved. Very, very interesting. But they're looking at single agonists, they're looking at co-agonists, and they're looking at triagonists, so a triple agonist. So they have in development currently, very early stage, a molecule called SP1000. 2297, which is a triple G, just like Retatrutide. It's a triple agonist. It works on GLP-1, GIP, and glucagon. So it activates all three receptors. And so this is a oral small molecule in the works from a company called Septerna. This is definitely going to be one to look at. They're already on the stock market, so take a look at them and do some research. But they're working on small molecules that can activate incretin receptors, but are really good oral alternatives to the injections, which really are I mean, every day it seems like we're dealing with people who are dealing with issues with the shortages. They are, by Eli Lilly CEO's own definition, some of the most complex things to manufacture on the planet. You just think about all the moving parts in here, and they all have to be sterile. And so not many people can manufacture them. And you think about just the sheer volume. There's over 100 million people in the United States alone that would, theoretically benefit from treatment of anti-obesity medications. And when you think about those numbers, they're staggering, and the indications are just growing and growing and growing. You think about later this year, we'll get a readout for semaglutide in the treatment of early stage Alzheimer's. And so you just think about the expansion of people outside of just the obesity indication that could potentially benefit from these medications. They're never going to be able to make enough pens, and it's just simply not sustainable. These pens are not sustainable. So seeing companies like Septerna, who are looking at developing highly efficacious small molecule drugs, is very, very exciting. So I wanted to bring you some information this week about Septerna and just encourage you to check that company out. Of course, we've been following for the last few weeks Metsera, another company who is working on some oral candidates that show a lot of promise. Metsera, of course, as we told you last week, is looking to go public and be publicly traded. So Metsera is another interesting one to keep your eyes on as well. But talking about new drugs. So what's some of the new information that we're getting about some of the new drugs? Well, there was a company called Veru, VERU, who announced some phase 2B top line data with a molecule called enobosarm that they've combined in this study with Wegovy to significantly reduce muscle loss while enhancing fat loss in older patients with obesity. Now, why this is so exciting is because, of course, with rapid weight loss, any rapid weight loss, the loss of muscle mass is always a concern. You want to have weight loss, sure, if you're living with obesity, but the quality of weight loss is what really matters when it comes to sustaining that weight loss and sustaining long-term positive health outcomes. And so, of course, Lilly is looking at, they've got their bimagrumab study with tirzepatide, potentially with retatrutide down the line. This is a third-party company sort of working with Novo Nordisk in this trial with Wegovy, because semaglutide specifically has been shown to actually have a higher loss of muscle mass with the weight loss. Tirzepatide wasn't quite as bad. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but if you're interested in those, shoot me an email at davidonthepen.com. I'd be happy to dig them up and provide them to you. But Veru basically combined their drug in a trial with Wegovy, and then they had an arm of the trial that was just on Wegovy. And the interesting outcome here is that patients on enobosarm plus Wegovy lost 71% less lean muscle mass compared to those on Wegovy alone, and saw 27% greater fat loss, suggesting that enobosarm helped shift weight loss towards fat while preserving muscle. Additionally, the drug improved physical function, with 54.5% fewer patients experiencing a significant decline in stair climb power, which was a key measure of mobility and strength. These results highlight enobosarm's potential to address the muscle loss concern that so many people raise when it comes to the topics of weight loss assisted by the current medications on the market. So Veru, Veru, is another one to keep your eye on with their asset called enobosarm. So I hope you'll check them out as well. That is some interesting news from Veru dropped this past week. So check them out for sure. In advocacy and policy news, to sort of round out the podcast today, there was some updates today with the confirmation of Health and Human Services Secretary candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I saw a lot of stuff going around on social media that he was confirmed today. That is not the case so far. So what happened was he passed through the committee with a 15 to 14 party line vote. So he squeaked out past the committee. And then ultimately what will happen is his nomination will go to a full floor vote in the Senate. And then at that point, he would be confirmed. So just as a matter of sort of clearing up kind of what's going on there, he still has yet to be confirmed. We have brought you some information because, again, this is not a political podcast. We don't talk about the politics of any of this. We just talk about how it affects accessibility to GLP-1 medications. Because, of course, if you've been with us for a while, you know that On the Pen is patient-centric GLP-1 news. The news that flows out about anti-obesity medications, treatments, breakthroughs, it's all developed for either the medical community or for the investor community. And so our job here at On the Pen is really to take the information that flows from those two sources and bring it to you in a patient-centric way. What does this mean to patients living with the disease of obesity who are seeking treatments like GLP-1 therapies or some of the therapies that we've talked about today? So we only bring this information to you in the realm of how it impacts GLP-1. So I just always like to make that caveat because people are always telling me, why don't you say this? Well, what about this? And what about that? And I'm like, that has nothing to do with GLP-1 accessibility. That's what we talk about here. So in terms of sort of what is in store for GLP-1 medications, anti-obesity treatments, once a potential confirmation happens with RFK Jr., he's really started to come around on the topics of GLP-1s. He's not there yet. I'm not, he's got a ways to come from the public statements he's made and the statements that he made in this committee under oath. He did, however, say that within the confines of obesity, these medications are somewhat of a miracle drug. And so obviously paraphrasing there, but obviously he's somebody who advocates very much for lifestyle interventions and definitely not a huge proponent of early childhood intervention of these medications, which of course we are when we talk about these topics with people who really know and understand the topic of the disease of obesity, right? The disease of obesity is in fact a disease. And we talk about set points and we talk about how difficult it is once your body gets to certain weights to come back from that weight. It's like your body wants to fight back biologically against you getting below a certain weight. So helping children not get to the point of morbid obesity, to me, seems like an obvious win in the fight against obesity. But I digress. So he's got a ways to go, but I'm hoping, and I'm hearing a lot of really great things as somebody who's a bit of an industry insider. I hear from people all over the industry every day, whether it's the compounding industry, whether it's the pharmaceutical industry, the telehealth industry. I'm constantly exchanging texts and emails with people who are inside the industry. And what I'm hearing is there is headway really being made with this new administration in the understanding of obesity and the importance of treating obesity from a multifaceted approach, not just changing lifestyles, changing behaviors, but the fact that it is a biological disease worthy of treatment and medicine, as is any other chronic condition that is out there. So we'll continue to keep you posted on how the nomination of RFK Jr. or potential nomination of RFK Jr. could impact the issues of accessibility. Of course, the one thing that I always like to remind people of as well is that the FDA, which is underneath Health and Human Services. The specific gentleman that President Trump has nominated to head up the FDA is a doctor called, his name is Dr. Martin Makary. And Dr. Makary is actually the chief medical officer of a telehealth company called Sesame Health. Sesame Health, in addition to providing other telemedicine options for patients and accessibility for patients, they offer GLP-1 weight loss therapies. And they offer compounded versions of weight loss therapy. So this gentleman who's coming in to head up the FDA, which is again in litigation with the OFA, when we talk about the greatest issue impacting accessibility, we talk about the 6 to 10 million people who rely on compounds conservatively in the face of real shortages of these medications. We're having somebody step into that role potentially who is uniquely probably equipped to understand what's going on here from a 360-degree perspective as a provider who is literally at the head of a telehealth company who is trying to improve access to GLP-1 medications for patients who need it. So I have reasons for optimism where others I think have maybe somewhat of a difficult time, because it's very difficult for people to sort of compartmentalize their politics. It's like everything one side does is bad and everything the other side does is good. And when you're dealing with a niche like obesity medicine, you have to be able to compartmentalize the conversation to what it means here and to us. And so that's what we'll continue to do here at On the Pen. Thank you for joining me today for another live edition of On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast. Please, another encouragement to give it a 5-star rating and review on your podcast avenue of choice, or if you're watching on YouTube, to make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and the bell for notifications. I also want to take a moment to thank our sponsor for each and every week, each and every podcast, and each and every On the Pen live. It's Ro. Ro is the telehealth company that I use personally, and I am a community advisor to Ro. So when they're looking at rolling out new things for the patient community, new products, new services, new changes within the offerings that they have, I have a seat at the table there on behalf of the community. So I thank Ro for giving the community a voice by way of engaging On the Pen. And I thank Ro for sponsoring the podcast here, as well as our Thursday night show, which, a little housekeeping note, this Thursday night at 9 p.m. Central on YouTube is our 100th episode of On the Pen Live. It's our Thursday night GLP-1 talk show. It's a little bit less formal than the podcast is. It's a great place for community. The 100th episode is this Thursday night, so I hope you'll tune in at 9 p.m. Central. And then, of course, we have our good friend Sabrina, who will be leading up another Friday night edition of the GLP-1 panel, a live panel with 5 to 6 different participants discussing their journey. One of my favorite comments on the most recent one, it's an every other week live show, and one of the favorite comments that we received this past week was a person who commented on the video and said, "I feel like an alien who found my people." And I think that is really the brilliance behind what Sabrina has put together with Beyond the Scale. And so I hope you'll join us Friday night at 7 p.m. Central for On the Scale with Sabrina. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for being the best part of what we do at On the Pen, and we will catch you